Of course. And this committee was created, I think, during my second year at the council. And at the time, I was very inspired to get and continue doing this sort of equity work, and felt that like we need a space like this, and others felt that way too. And I still feel that way. And so that's kind of why I'm here. It's just like it's the work that has to be done. And I'm happy that we're all here together to do the work. For hopes for this year, I think that I don't really have any specific ones at this time. Okay, I'm happy that we're all here together.
Maybe you'll have some after you.
I think so.
Oh, sure, I'll go next. So I'm Leslie. Personally, the work is very meaningful to me, and equity on all different spectra. And I really do mean that. Personally and professionally, it's super important to me. And the work that we did as a continuum of care to identify our gaps in equity, and specifically around racial equity, we put so much time and effort into that I didn't want it to just be a report that sits on a shelf somewhere, but that we are still trying to march towards progress somehow, even though we know we're never going to be able to do everything that we need to do. We still got to keep the agenda moving forward. So I'm happy to be part of the work. Sometimes it's a challenge with all the 12,000 meetings.
Yes.
But it's the right thing. It's a meaningful use of my time. So, and on behalf of my organization, it helps me then bring back ideas and language and connections and structure to our internal work. So that's equally important to me.
Sorry, I'm moving around.
And my own internal work, now that I think about it, not just the internal work of our organization, Trinity Center, but my own internal work, because I'm not done either, you know.
And I would say for me, equity is pretty fundamental. I think that we need to be having, diverse voices at tables, and we need to be making them accessible so that everybody can have those voices at our table. And so talking about this and providing action on it are very important. I'm excited for all the good work.
Okay. Iman, anything you want to say as a new committee member? Okay. Okay, I am going to, especially because it is a new year and we have new folks, just doing a recap of actually the purpose and accomplishments from last year. So the purpose of the committee, as sort of approved by the council, is to increase awareness, community dialogue, and lead concrete action to achieve equity throughout the homeless system of care. And there's a long and not complicated, but there were many steps that led to the council forming this committee. I'll just note we had an equity assessment that was conducted by an outside partner. I don't even know how many years ago now because time's a blur. I think we presented it in 2022, and that helped the council decide to create this committee and help create some of the priorities. So this is a little hard to see. This was the work plan for last year, and the committee decided to get very, very specific in terms of what they wanted to try and accomplish in the first year. So it was really focused on creating accessible information outreach and educational materials, and we actually ended up doing even a sub-focus on Latinos. So we basically got through our goals for Q1, Q2. That work is still ongoing, and we're going to do some update on that. But we've gotten really far. There's still some more work to do on that and the launching of that, but we did some good progress. One of the goals from last year was to determine priorities for 2024. So these are the things, little check marks are the things we actually did accomplish last year. And those are the things we're still working on. So there will be opportunities if you are interested in kind of social marketing and creating materials, and we're going to create a video. Like there are opportunities, and this is true for all people listening too. There are opportunities, and we have some of our partners here that have helped even with the work so far. The other thing we did was actually create a set of definitions, working definitions for equity-related terms. So that we as the committee, but also for the council as a whole, like everyone has sort of an agreed upon set of definitions. So that's included in the packet. We include it after our agenda for all the council meetings so that we don't end up going down the rabbit hole of like, well, what do you mean by equity? So we have all that sort of established. These are the things that we defined. And a lot of these definitions were based on the equity assessment that was conducted. So happy to, oh, thank you, Jamie, bless you. So just noting that's some of the work from last year. For this year, and this is, I know, a little odd, right? So some of you are just joining this committee and you're like, well, last year's committee set our work for this year. I don't think any of this is going to be shocking, right? So what this group said, the goals will be for the equity, to provide equity-focused input to all council committees and working groups. So really trying to stitch things, and you're going to see, we're going to do that, some of this today. Because I think the overarching feeling is we don't want equity to be like siloed as its own thing and check a box, like, yeah, we did equity. This has to be in all the work we do. The second thing is partnering on equity-focused projects. And so some of that is like this material development that we're working on, but there's other stuff. And then strengthened relationships with partners, essential to increase it. So like at the end of the year, we're gonna look back and go like, well, did we do these things? So we're gonna keep track of that as we go. One of the other things that we decided last year was, as we're trying to broaden the focus of the committee a little bit, is to structure the agendas for these meetings in a very specific way. So that there's like a chunk that is things you guys want to learn about, a chunk that is things that you are going to be providing input on. So this is where we talked about like the other committees and work groups and all that stuff. And then this sort of monitoring, right? There's equity work happening or there's data. And so there's stuff that this group, I think, will kind of just like be keeping their eyes on and monitoring and being like, hey, what's happening with this? Or I have questions around equity around this thing, or this looks good, or we can see that there's progress happening sort of through an equity lens. So that's all going to be new this year compared to last year. The other thing I'll note about this year compared to last year is in terms of like the meeting pattern. And I know we've done a lot of different stuff with like meeting patterns this year. So for this committee, we look at it quarter by quarter. January, no meeting, right? So if you look at the first quarter, there was no meeting in January. The second meeting, which is today, right, is going to be an official committee meeting. And that means we have to have in-person quorum. That means we can make decisions here. And then the third month of a quarter, we're doing more as like a working group so that we can continue to like discuss things and talk about things and think and keep things moving. But we won't be making formal decisions there, and those will be virtual. We're trying to figure out how to make things as accessible as possible while still being compliant with all the rules. So if you get confused, it's fine, just ask me. I ended up sending calendar invites anyway, because I was like, I think we're all gonna get confused. So let me pause there and see if folks have questions about sort of like the overview and like purpose of the committee. Yeah.
So the committee, you know, upon like learning, inputting, going through those steps in the meeting, I guess like the one outcome the committee could see is like to bring something to the council or something like that. So I just wanted to make sure that was still.
Yes, good question. So this, in terms of like decisions of this committee, mostly it's going to be things that this group will bring to the full council. So because of the structure that we have under the Board of Supervisors, it's not likely that this committee will ever bring anything directly to example for the board. But there are lots of recommendations, thoughts, ideas, things that we can bring to the full council to then get implemented, voted on, moved, that sort of thing. Does that help? And then there also may be other like community processes where like other people may start to see this group as a resource. And so maybe there's another group that's working on something equity related, and they might come and seek your input as folks that are committed to this work and have done sort of a deeper. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, listen.
So my question then is, you are great at organizing, facilitating these meetings. Are you also taking all the notes and the history and the records, or is that going to be the role of some of the home-based folks on the group?
So that's a very interesting question that you just asked. So I am experimenting with using AI. So Zoom has an AI feature where they basically can provide you with a summary of your meeting. And I had like a lot of mixed feelings about that in the beginning. And what somebody pointed out to me is like, they've already captured all this content. Like, it's not like you're giving them anything that they don't already have. So I'm gonna try actually basing our meeting minutes that I'll sort of finalize. The AI stuff is sort of like the basis for that, and then I will obviously like tune it up. But yes, I am basically the lead staff person for this committee. One of the things I would like to do today is identify or maybe two people that are interested in maybe being a co-chair. So kudos to Iman and Hope that helped think about the agenda for this one. I was saying earlier, like this committee has been really an interesting like intellectual challenge to think about because it's so big and there's so many pieces. And we need more thought partners than just me in this thinking. So we can decide if we want to set an official chair or people volunteer to help think about the agendas each meeting. So that was a long answer to your question.
No, that's helpful. And then who will write sort of the summary of what we're doing for the staff report to the Council on Homelessness?
Me.
You.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's actually something that's going to come up later. Like there may be times where we want to just put stuff from this committee into the staff report, but there are probably going to be times where we want to actually do a presentation to the full council about whatever the thing is. And so we'll talk about that as a group about like who wants to do that presentation. And then I as staff will work with whoever that is to do the slides. Yeah. Let me see how we're doing on time. So because we're running a little late, I was going to have us flesh out the work plan for 2024 a little bit. I think I want to pause on that because we have kind of a skeleton, and that's in the packet. I want to get through the other stuff because we really need to get to that, and then we can come back to that at the end if we still have time. The other thing we can do is like in the working group next month, we can flesh some of that out too. And mostly thinking about like, what are the things that you guys want to learn so that we can start to sketch that out. How does that feel? Okay to, yes.
That sounds fine unless we have to have somehow formally decided upon and blessed
We've
the
already done
work
that.
plan.
Good
Okay.
question. No, we've already
Because we
basically,
did,
we've
okay,
blessed the
gotcha.
work plan. It's more like from my own selfish purposes, finding out more about the different topics of the things you want to learn.
And it didn't look like it from the agenda, but are there any other decisions that need to be made today?
Not related to that, but yes, there are decisions.
Okay.
Yeah,
And we should
good point.
prioritize those.
Yep. Okay, so let me,
That's a good
sorry.
plan.
That's not what I want to share. Hold please. Okay. So we're gonna come back to this. Okay. So one of the things that the group said last year is that they were interested in learning more about reentry, meaning folks returning from incarceration and coming back into the community and that overlap with homelessness and kind of how our systems work together, what's the data. And so what I have today under Learn is like the highest high level slice around the data. In part because, as you might imagine, there's a lot of challenges with data sharing and not just data sharing, but how different systems are capturing data. So what I am presenting is data that we have from 2022 from our HMIS system, right? So this is through people that have hit the homeless system of care. And we have documented in our system somehow that they are either formerly incarcerated and are released through AB 109 and they access homeless services. The other data that I got was from the Office of Reentry and Justice. And this is probationers and individuals preparing to return to the community who have requested housing services. So, and that the time frame is calendar year 2022 for our data, fiscal year 2022-23 for theirs. So if that AB 109, good question. Is there anybody on this call who feels like they want to explain AB 109?
I can try.
Okay.
This is 4 years old because we did AB 109 programs back at Shelter Inc.
Right.
That the people I was responsible to and for were doing, right?
Mhm.
So it's for people released from the jails to probation for a non-violent, non-sex offender, non-something crime. So it was non. There were three things. So it was not the really hardcore crimes.
Mhm.
And it was a set of services, both financial and case management, for that subset of people that in Contra Costa County anyway was operated through different nonprofit organizations.
Mhm.
And people could either be referred through the probation system, or they could find their way accidentally
Mhm.
or by word of mouth to one of these providers of AB 109 services.
Mhm.
The money and the rules and everything came from probation.
Mhm.
Not the homeless system of care, not the state, it was excess money, or not excess, but it was money that the county decided it could reallocate for these helpful services based on, I guess, having some savings in the jail system, if I remember. So those are the key things. It was people leaving jails for probation for these non
Yeah.
crimes.
And so Rachel says third is non-threat. I think basically like they're not considered a threat for reoffense. Is that it, Rachel? Oh, maybe she can't unmute.
And there's a whole system among the AB 109 and probation department with community input. There's a community advisory board, and they have their whole system.
Yep.
And interfacing with that was a little interesting, but informative.
And so Nicole Green, who is in the reentry seat, is part of that system, right? And so that's actually, it's great that she's on the community advisory board, which is involved in sort of like how all these program funds get spent. So what I'm hearing is, it might be useful for this group at some point to have like actually a reentry 101 kind of piece. Thank you, Jamie. There's some more information about the CAB. So at a like super high glance, what we see from those two data sources, which again, like the data collection is imperfect. I don't have the total number of clients from ORJ, but what she said was basically they had 440 clients in that year period that were re-entering and asked specifically for homeless services. That doesn't mean that's all the people that need them. I imagine those numbers are much higher. And for us, we saw 639 clients out of our total population of like 10,000 plus that we touched in some way. ORJ
also self-reported having a justice involvement history.
Or they came through, yeah. Thank you, Joe. Again, I love when people do this. So ORJ is Office of Reentry and Justice. So that's basically the county department that is holding all this data around reentry stuff for the county.
And it's not the same as the probation department, which
Nope.
is the sheriff's department and all that.
Yep. And this is actually like, I'm really at my growing edge understanding that whole system. So my question for you all is like, there was a request for data, and this is kind of what we pulled at a very high level. So I think one question for this group, and this kind of ties into that work plan, but like, is there other data that you want to know or see? Is there more information that you want to know or see about this intersection? Thinking like kind of with the lens of equity in our homeless system of care and what could move that forward. Yeah, you know.
What are we allowed to ask? What are we, sorry, excuse me. What, regulations are we kind of constrained by?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think my recommendation here is like ask for the sky, and then as staff, like I can find out if that's even possible, if it's legal, if it's like, so I think this is a good time to brainstorm. Like if you in your wildest dreams could like know things or have things, what would you want? And then we can figure out what's actually available.
You mean data wise?
Data wise, are there other things that you want to like learn or know, especially if we think about this learn section of these agendas? Anything relating to reentry or that intersection between the two systems? Yeah.
Yes, yes. So I know there have been changes recently around what can or cannot be asked of people about their justice involvement background. And so specifically, I think we should pay some attention to educating our entire system of care, how to help people with that background navigate housing applications. And one, watch out for what they're being asked that they're not even allowed to be asked anymore. And two, how to talk about if there is a justice involvement, how to talk about that. Because I think it probably doesn't, I would imagine that just like BIPOC people are overrepresented among homeless, our homeless system of care, they are overrepresented among the justice involvement system. And that's a double whammy when you're trying to get housing. So what can our system do to mitigate that whammy?
Yep.
Right? Because we could have the best housing service workers in the world, and that criminal justice background is going to block people every time unless we teach them how to get over it. And not just this time, but the next time they go for housing, and the next time, and the next time, and the next time.
And actually, to your point, so you all may or may not know this, so the very first training we did this year for our COC providers was about how to best support clients in our homeless system of care that are reentrants. And this is some of what they touched on. So those those trainings are available, both there's a recording and a slide deck. But I think that's like at a very high level, just like what they can and can't ask. We have done some training about some of that.
So our decision makers maybe need to understand that too, like us, and you know.
Absolutely.
I think that, data wise, if I could have the sky, I definitely would be interested in the intersections of race and gender. I think like especially race, and also I think if I could have infinite data, I would love to get even more complex and see that in like next level intersection between race, gender, and the people who we have here who have we've marked our and same with people who are experiencing or may have a disability as well, and also if I could have this guy, also maybe people struggling and who have reported struggling with mental health or substance abuse. Now I know probably a lot of those things are possible, but yeah, that's kind of, I think.
Also, Iman, are you, as committee member, do you have anything, requests or thoughts on this?
No, I agree with the data comment. I think that makes a lot of sense as a next step.
Joe, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm curious on if there's specific data around registered sex offenders and their homelessness. If there is I'm interested in just seeing that data, if there's anything specific comparatively to those who are returning home who aren't registered and those who are.
Yeah, it's a good question. That's actually something we touched on a little bit on this training we did this year, but dove into more last year, the training that we did for how to support reentrance. And there was a specific focus on like the shorthand of sort of 290 offenses, and how to best support folks getting housing, because a lot of times there can be restrictions about where people can be in shelter or where people can be housed. So I will pull up some of those training materials for sure. Yeah.
So something that I think would be incredibly helpful would be recidivism rate.
Mm-hmm.
And my thought process regarding that is I have a sibling who has been in and out of the prison system their whole lives,
Mm-hmm.
and they started as a youth at
Mhm.
13. As each time they came out, you know, we tried a different plan, and at one point that plan was, we can't help you.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of folks who have repeat, we're going to see higher numbers of homelessness because families unfortunately do get to those situations.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be something that would be helpful to see, because that's what
Yeah.
I hypothesized.
Yeah.
And from there, maybe some concrete actions to help high recidivism rate folks when they're out specifically. So that's just a thought.
Yeah. And I do think there is data also showing that not having secure housing can lead to recidivism on the criminal justice side, right? So those two things are totally linked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is why I've for a long time said, and I'm really grateful to hear other people saying, we need to get the help into the jails before people
Mhm.
are on the streets. Like,
Mhm.
we need to be doing that,
Mhm.
proactive.
We're there now.
Mhm. Great. Okay, anybody else on this topic?
I would just like to add, it would be really good to have Nicole Green to be part of this conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Because she actually works inside, and the CAB has been doing they do surveys, not only of their partners, but of the actual population.
Yep.
And then also it would be good to have Patrice Guillory be part of this conversation, since she is over the Office of Reentry and Justice, and there's been a lot of there's conversations between probation and health services about gathering a lot of this data on both a micro and macro level. So we're working toward that as well. And I think there's a lot of information out there already that could be fed into this that answers a lot of questions that have already been asked.
Agreed. I appreciate that. Yeah, and I actually reached out to Patrice for the data, and Nicole is on the council now. She's not on this committee, but I think, yes, I think she'd be a great resources to pull in as this group is increasing their learning and knowledge on this topic.
And then the last thing I would add in response to Rachel's question, she said, I'd like to see what county level data we can gather about foster care justice involvement overlap. The Juvenile Justice Commission meets every other month now, and they're an advisory body of the courts, and they follow both. Our Employment and Human Services Department has a contact that reports out to them every other month as to the numbers of foster care youth that have touched our juvenile justice system. So all that information is also readily available through that body.
Thank you, Jill. That's great. Okay, I want to turn things over. Okay, so this is exciting. This is one of those input opportunities where Mark Mora from Homebase is going to bring some things to you all, specifically related to work the governance committee is doing and the funding committee is doing. So Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will be your Vanna for the slides.
Thank you, Vanna / Jamie. Hi, everyone. Mark Moore with Homebase. It's nice to see everyone. First time, I think, in the equity committee meeting. I support, along with some of my teammates, support different committees within the COC. But I actually was going to ask Jamie if it's okay, because we're doing, Homebase is doing feedback for the governance committee and then feedback for the funding committee. Is it okay if we switch the two? Because Riley's going to help me with the NOFO work group, and she has to hop off early.
Okay, So,
Awesome.
sorry, governance first.
Yep,
No,
that's, yeah, this one first.
okay,
No, wait, but you have to go back, I think, a few to the
fine.
beginning of this section.
Sorry. Tell me when.
Keep going right there.
Okay, great.
Awesome, thanks. And I'll pass it over to Riley.
All right, so I'm going to kick it off. Hi, everyone. Riley Mee from Homebase, Research Associate. Also my first time visiting the Equity Committee, but really excited to get your input. So Mark and I are here today to get your feedback on a part of the NOFO refinement process happening in the COC Funding Committee, which some of you may have heard of or are currently taking part of. But specifically today, we want your feedback on 2 current NOFO scoring tool factors with a direct relation to equity, because they deal with providers' lived experience engagement activities, as well as their commitment to racial equity. And just before we dive in, we're going to give you little snippets of context throughout. But first thing, just NOFO refers to the annual funding competition in which COCs seek COC funds from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And the 2024 NOFO is coming up sooner than we'd like. So that's why we're already talking about it. So your insight today is going to help shape Homebase recommendations to improve the local NOFO competition process. So Homebase has been meeting with a working group of the funding committee monthly to present recommendations there. And the group reacts to them and considers the consequences of such changes. And in this working group, council and homelessness members are there, but also providers that currently have COC money or maybe looking to apply for COC funds are there, as well as any community members. It's a public meeting space. So we're going to be taking lots of notes today to inform the recommendations that we'll give to the group based for the lived experience, engagement, and racial equity factors. And before I move on from the slide, again, just lots of context here. I mentioned this is kind of part of a NOFO refinement process in general, and the goal of this refinement process is to streamline the competition process, enhance objectivity and scoring, and better differentiate between high and higher performing projects. And this kind of came about because a lot of projects are performing really well and meeting the same standards with the current tools. So the community's at a point where it's revisiting what makes a project meaningful and successful in the community. So we just wanted you to keep that context in mind. On this next slide, we just kind of cover what scoring tools are and how specific factors we're discussing today came about. So I mentioned the scoring tools a few times. What is that? So scoring tools in the NOFO competition are essentially, they serve as a rubric. These tools are used to score local NOFO project applications. And in the meeting materials today, you should have received the renewal project scoring tool for the 2023 competition. And that's used to score projects that are currently receiving COC funding. There's also a scoring tool designed for just new projects that have not yet received COC funding. The scoring tools are revisited and revised every year by the community to make sure the scoring process continues to align with the COC's priorities for addressing homelessness. And the funding committee is kind of the COC entity responsible for this review every year. So 2 years ago, the funding committee decided to introduce 2 new factors to the scoring tools, and these concerned NOFO applicants' lived experience engagement and their commitment to racial equity. These factors are the exact same in both the renewal and new scoring tool. And last year, the factors were revised again and updated to then require not just narrative response from applicants, but also documentation to back up what they were saying, and also to reward higher impact strategies for both factors. And it's really great that these factors exist now and are part of the competition process, but just wanted to, share they're new. They're only 2 years old, so it's important to kind of keep working out the kinks in them till they align with community priorities. And we wanted to share the main feedback we got in the last year is just that these factors are a bit burdensome. All the documentation required for them meant applicants sent us pages and pages of evidence, and that meant the review and rank panelists, those who are actually scoring NOFO application, they had to read through all that additional material, and it's hard to capture lived experience engagement and racial equity as opposed to some more numerical factors on the scoring tool like bed utilization rate, things where there's a clear number to measure. So we're hoping your amazing brains, we can pick today about it. So we're starting first with the factor on lived experience engagement. And I was wondering maybe if, would folks like me to share my screen to show the scoring tool? Mark just shared it in the chat, but do people here feel familiar with the factor, or would it help to have a quick glance at it?
Can we see it, please? I'll stop
Okay,
sharing.
yeah.
Go ahead. Do you have the power to share, Riley? Okay.
It should, yep,
Great.
it's up. All right, so just really quickly, this is the factor on the renewal scoring tool, but as I mentioned, it's the same on the new project one. And it asks applicants to share if they are, they get 1 point if they're completing both of these strategies to engage people with lived experience of homelessness, which are administering lived experience satisfaction surveys, program development operations. So, Jamie, you have a question?
Oh no, I was just gonna point something out after you were done running through. Go for it.
Okay. So that's the first part of the factor, is that checking to see if applicants are doing both of these things, and then they have to provide documentation of how they're involving people with lived experience and program development and how they're doing satisfaction surveys. Then there's a narrative question where the applicant has to describe a time where they received feedback from participants and then how they acted on that feedback. And the last bit of the factor, agencies applying have to describe if they are implementing one or more of these strategies that are listed below. And there are, just checking, there are 3 strategies listed. And if they say that they provide narrative that they do these strategies, additionally, they have to provide some type of documentation or evidence that, for example, they have a board member with current or past experience of homelessness, or they have a lived experience board. So that's just a quick summary. Jamie, do you want to add something?
And I just wanted to remind folks that each project has to complete an application, but many projects have the same agency running them. So H3 has 3 projects that we submit applications for, housing projects. And so we would have to repeat this information 3 different times, even though as an agency, we might be operating our lived experience engagement in a similar way across the projects, just to give an idea of why it was burdensome for providers to be applying.
Yeah, thank you for that context. And the way the questions are written now are specific to what an agency is doing, not, they're not really asking about the project that's applying, that project's lived experience engagement strategies. So we will go back to the PowerPoint as soon as that. Yeah, no worries. And we have a few questions. Great. So these questions will kind of guide our discussion. And I'll start with the first one at the top, but we can kind of jump around. And we just kind of want to get your impression of seeing these factors and thinking about how they could be improved. So first, wondering what folks in the room think lived experience engagement looks like when it's really well done by an agency, and how that might be captured in a scoring tool. And you can come off mute, or if you're in the room, just chat out loud or put it in the chat.
On an organizational level, I guess this might not apply, but I think that, because like most of the time I know for our NOFO stuff, we're looking at, well, is there somebody on the board who has lived experience, or does somebody who's sort of higher up than that sort of lived experience? That being said, I don't know how much it can add other than like maybe like compensation. If there are those positions that aren't, I'm looking on the board, but I know that's.
That's, I think, an excellent point. If you have somebody in a position of, they're a director, they're a thing, and you have lived voice experiences, they should be getting equitable pay. They should be brought on at a consultant level, like you bring on other consultants. And so seeing examples of that, I think, are what it looks like well done. Point Source Youth is a model that I think they work with young people really well. And they're just treating them equal and like they belong at the table. So I do think there can be this space between lived experience and I got a degree, or I have worked here for 10 years. So I think that finding a way to ensure that, the engagement is real. So that would be something I'd say would be something that I'd like to see well done.
Thank you for sharing, Joe. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I think there's this the person with lived experience has a voice, a choice, and is part of that decision making factor. Like if the organization program can prove that somebody with lived experience has influence over the program policies, I think that's really the point of it, because it is the reason why you have somebody with lived experience on your team is to give feedback on how to better treat the people that the program is serving. So if there is some kind of correspondence with, like, if they can prove like that person is involved in policy change, that person is involved in making a decision, has a vote, has a, that kind of influence on the program. I think that is where I stand with, like, how do you know it's well done? That's when you know it's well done. And also, like, where does the program, I don't know if this is part of that question or if it's somewhere else, but it's like, where does the program actually find the folks with lived experience? Like, it would even be better if those folks that were picked for the lived experience perspective used their program through their homelessness. Like, that would even be better. But like, where are they picking these folks from? Is the program using people that have gone through their actual program?
Well, given those great answers you all three just gave, maybe we can turn it back to the scoring tool. Now that we've defined what great lived experience engagement is, what do you folks like about what's in the current factor? What do you think is important in what I just showed you and needs to stay in there?
Can we bring it back up?
Yeah, there's a Riley, they're asking if we can see it again.
Yep.
Is there anything in this? Nope, okay.
Yo, I can keep it up the whole time.
Okay.
I think I can ask the questions. I can put them in the chat if anyone needs to read them.
And can you zoom in just a tad bit? Zoom doesn't give that. I'm not able to do it myself anymore.
Is that okay? You can't see it all at once because it's quite a long factor, but what are folks thinking about? What's important that needs to stay in this factor? Or if it's easier to start with, what don't you like? Oh, sorry to interrupt.
No, I was like, it might be one other thing for you. I want to start fresh. Because there's not a lot I love. Satisfaction surveys immediately come to mind. Everybody is over surveyed. We know that. And it's just kind of confusing. Like even reading the questions, I'm having a hard time wondering what's wanted, especially in the, does the agency describe one example of feedback received from participant in the past 2 years and the way the agency responded to that feedback, including the process for ensuring feedback is implemented in any concrete changes it made to program design, policy, or operations. I don't know what that means.
So is it is it that it's too dense and too much language that it's not clear?
Yes.
Yeah. But is there anything specific about the content there, what they're asking, or?
I really don't know what they're asking. I'm so sorry.
No, that is like a really good thing to raise, that how can we get really clear answers from providers if they maybe are interpreting it differently. I think right now what it's asking for, this question is, it's not really specific about where the feedback comes from other than participants. Just it's supposed to be an example of when feedback was taken into deep consideration and some type of policy or program change
Okay.
came
So that
out
sounds like
of
an
it.
interview question. And if that were the case, I would want something more concrete, because I can, and I do, I was like, hey, can you get me these answers because I have to submit the thing. But it's not necessarily good data.
I was also gonna expand upon, I got that, I understood, like the example of feedback. I think that maybe there's, like, from my point of view, having seen like this process, I get it, but from like somebody who's reading this and it's looking to apply, that's, I know that there's already a question of capacity for, especially for like newer orgs, to be able to like actually like just get everything done in time in the way that is required. And so on one hand, yes, I know we're talking about systems level operations. It's like high level where you have to like make sure the language fits. At the same time, I definitely don't understand exactly the way to answer this question, because yeah, and that could also be my lack of experience in some of those roles. But if I was, yeah, it does seem a little bit confusing.
So one example that I was thinking of with this, so like say for that second bullet point, say the feedback was like, I'm a young person staying at Cali House and there were no gender neutral bathrooms, and that's a problem. So one of the ways they could answer is say, we got this feedback, and what we did was to designate one of the bathrooms as gender neutral. We created signage, we changed our policies, we did education of staff. And like that would be the example of sort of like the process and then concrete changes based on feedback from somebody. That's kind of just to like make it a little more. Is that helpful at all?
That is helpful.
Okay.
And like, I don't know if we have space because this is already such a big question, but maybe even like a similar example would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I don't, not, yeah, maybe, I don't know what everybody else thinks about that.
No, that is a great idea. That's easy to add, but could really help enhance the responses given from providers. Given that we don't have a ton of time to talk, so I think in a 3 minutes or so, I might pass it off to Mark to talk about the racial equity factor. So I'd love to hear if there's anything that you're seeing if there's anything you think should be added to this factor based on our discussions, what's missing in here or what needs to be changed. Hopefully maybe Joe or Jamie might have comments related to that.
Can I have a clarifying question, please?
Mhm.
What we're looking at right now, this is the score sheet, correct? This is the document that we would see in the nominating committee. This isn't the question you're asking the agencies. Like, this is the question does the agency describe one example? What is the question you're asking the agency? Like, that's a different question.
Yeah, they're kind of one and the same. So the providers who are submitting applications will see this so that they're aware of how they're being scored. And the language is written towards the scoring panel so that they know, what are you looking for when you're reading the responses. And part of the challenge that I'd love your guys' input on is we have to make questions that are answerable for folks who are really large agencies and smaller agencies. So it might be easier for some nonprofits that have a 20-member board to have someone with lived experience on the board. And it might be really challenging for a newer nonprofit to have 3 people on the board to have that same sort of power structure. And so I think that's part of why we get such broad language, and we try to leave room for many different ways of addressing how people are incorporating feedback. But loved hearing kind of what would make it more clear. And I think the recommendation Juno gave was really great.
And I
And
think
so are we the ones coming up with these questions, or is this like a blanket, like we can change these questions? Like, why isn't it more simple? Because there are like there's a very
Joe, we're losing you a bit.
passive voice in the way this, it's like isn't there just a said, I'm just rambling, I think, but
So sorry, Riley, you go for it.
No, I think you captured what she was asking.
Yeah, a lot of the input that you guys will give will be incorporated into what this actually ends up looking like, but the funding committee of the Council on Homelessness will finalize the documents. We're just trying to do our due diligence and visit with all of the committees that might have good input to give.
But yeah, there's a lot of room to shake this up, and so don't be afraid to throw out bold ideas here. And Mark will share later the information about how to join the NOFO work group if you want to be part of a longer discussion on this. But does anyone want to quickly add anything else about this? Their impressions of this factor?
Let's say his hand up.
Yeah, I'll try to be really, really quick. First of all, I 100,000,000% agree with Juno that this would be a lot of work for a new organization just trying to get in the game compared to a larger established organization. But what I want to add to the conversation is, yes, this is related to the organization, but nowhere in here do we ask how that specifically relates to the exact project for which it's being applied. Because a really sophisticated agency could be doing all of these things and only applying all that good knowledge and feedback and input to some of its programs, not necessarily these specific HUD-funded projects. So without trying to make more work for the applicant, how is all of this related to the specific project that funding is being requested for?
I like that.
That's my 2 cents.
Thank you for that. Very clear, concise feedback. No, I think that is a great point, that that's not something being captured in this tool right now. So I think I will hand it to Mark, but just to reiterate again, there is a space where these conversations happen every month in the NOFO work group, and Mark will share later on the details about how to join that.
And Mark, do you want me to share? I'll share the slide deck.
I think, yeah, I think the questions are going to be the same, basically, that we're asking for the racial equity factor. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what Riley did, which is screen share the factor itself. So give me 1 second to pull that up. So it's written in a very similar way. So I imagine some of the feedback might be similar. Let me increase this a little bit. So the only difference with this one, it doesn't have that feedback example portion where we're asking for narrative. It does have like 2 sections in the factor, where the first one is asking if they do certain strategies. And then if they do all of the strategies listed there, they get 1 point. I think when this was created, it was kind of seen as these are like the lower impact strategies around racial equity. And then similar to the other factor, there's like these quote unquote higher level or higher impact strategies. And then you get 1 point for doing each of those things. So some examples, sorry, I just kind of skipped over, but above. So again, all of these are kind of seen as the lower impact ones. Does your agency have a public written commitment to racial equity? Do you provide written materials that are translated into different languages? So those are just some examples. And then some examples of the higher impact ones are, what internal structures do you have that address racial equity and barriers that your participants or clients face in terms of inequities? What strategies exist in your agency to recruit, retain, and develop staff who are BIPOC or represent other marginalized communities? So that is the entirety of the racial equity factor. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the same questions essentially that we had asked with the previous factor, which is, what is racial equity for an agency? What does it look like when it's well done? What do you like about this current iteration of the factor? What would you change? Again, keeping in mind that some of the feedback we got is for this factor, and the other factor is there's just a lot that's required to answer the questions and meet the requirements. So for any strategy that an agency says it does in this factor or in the previous factor, they have to submit documentation. Some of those documents can be pages and pages long. So open up the floor. Any responses to the discussion questions?
Initial thoughts about the kind of lower level and higher level is that again, I think smaller or newer organizations would have a way harder time hitting your higher point value metrics and wouldn't necessarily be fair. I like this one better. When I think about what I want in like the most ideal racial equitable world, that one I'm gonna have to come back to.
That's perfectly fine. Appreciate the feedback. Anyone else?
Leslie has her hand up.
You can always count on me. So one, I would echo my previous comment here as well, that it's all well and good if the agency is awesome on this, but now, especially with the COC applications, we're talking usually about specific housing complexes in specific communities. So is what's happening for that specific project consonant with the group of people who live there and the community within which it is? So some attention to that. If it's in a place where everybody in the community is Spanish speaking, can you show that you are providing all the services equitably in Spanish so that that's not a barrier? That's one comment. The other is, and I forgot it, what was my comment going to be? Oh, right. Also, the organization may be ACEs. They may even actually have thought through and provided nuanced, equitable services at the property, but are the outcomes the same? And where's the data for that? Do we even have the data for that? This is where I worry that we don't. So in a property, if the stayers, who we term as stayers, is the proportion of stayers equitable? Is the proportion of leavers equitable? Or is there some disequity in there, right? Are all the people who leave or are forced to leave or voluntarily leave purple, right? And not any other color. Is anybody paying attention to that? That, at the end of the day, is equity for me, So is everybody who's having to leave some characteristic that is already under equitized? So, and how do we prove that? How do we even know that? We don't. But
Thanks, Leslie.
That's my soapbox.
Yeah, the point is well taken. It's definitely something that the funding committee, not just this current iteration, but last year, talked about in regards to racial equity. Was that, essentially what we're looking at here with the current language of the factor, and even for the lived experience one, it's looking at a lot of outputs related to racial equity. Whether or not you do certain things in terms of processes that may lead to equity, but in the end, what you're talking about is racially equitable outcomes. And that is definitely something that I think the funding committee eventually wants to take on. I don't know that it's within kind of the scope and limits of the time frame, considering all the other overhauls that's kind of happening with the NOFO process. But I think it's something definitely that there is some interest in the community to look at with this specific scoring tool in the COC funding process overall. I see Jamie S.'s hand.
Yeah, I think one of the challenging things about looking at outcomes, particularly with permanent supportive housing projects, is how few leavers we get year over year. So one year, if a project has 1 or 2 people leave, you can't make assessments about equitable outcomes on 1 or 2 people and have it be kind of statistically significant or relevant. It could just be the way people happen to be during that year. And it's really hard to then get a trend analysis as well, because so few people year over year are leaving, which is a really, really great thing. Most people retain their housing, and we love that. And so that is one of the things I remember talking about a lot last year and trying to figure out how do we get an objective assessment of equity when our PSH programs particularly are doing what they need to do and helping people retain their housing.
Yep, I get that.
Maybe one last comment, because I'm trying to be mindful of time and I still have to cover the governance committee item as well. But any other thoughts or questions relating to improving this factor? Okay. If there's nothing, because I can't see hands raised in the room.
Nothing here.
Okay. Then I think that will conclude this part. I thank you all for providing feedback to this. What we're going to do, would you mind pulling up the slide deck again, Jamie, because we can show the dates for the funding committee work group. But yeah, what we're going to do is take your feedback to the funding committee NOFO work group. That is the Notice of Funding Opportunity work group. This is their meeting schedule. In addition to taking your feedback to that group, I don't know, there likely is probably some overlap with some folks here from the council who are on that committee as well. So there's that, and then everyone's invited to participate in these meetings. So we're actually going to be talking about this topic at the next funding committee NOFO work group. So that's February 20th. So that's next week. So you're welcome to attend. If you have additional thoughts on this, you can certainly share it there, but we will relay what you've shared through the notes we've taken with that group. So that is that portion. And I'm also here for the governance committee. This will be a lot quicker, so hopefully we can make up some time. That was, again, one of the committees that Homebase supports in the COC. And then another one is the governance committee. So I'm going to speak on that. So same deal, we're trying to solicit some feedback from you all before we're going to take some of these issues to the actual committee itself. So it's going to help, your feedback's going to help shape some of these recommendations, or at least be put into consideration as that group is deciding on what it's going to recommend to the larger Council on Homelessness. So the governance committee is responsible for reviewing and revising the governance charter and bylaws of the Council on Homelessness on an annual basis. And they're looking to increase efficiency and impact of the council through looking at the bylaws. So like I said, the request today is just that you all give some feedback, and there's a number of recommendations that we were looking at as staff or as Homebase to take to that committee. And we looked over them and talked with H3 staff about what would be the most relevant to bring to this committee. And so we're only bringing one item. And again, same deal. You can also participate in this meeting, the governance committee meetings, if you want to. But we're only going to look at one of the recommended revisions. And just as context, there's not going to be many revisions that staff are going to recommend to that committee. And of course, the committee can add items to that as well. But we don't expect that process to take very long, maybe one, maybe 2 meetings, we're hoping. And so the one change that we're going to recommend, and this is something that's come up previously in a different committee called the nominating committee. And that committee is where they do the application process and look at candidates to fill open seats in the council. So that meets like middle of the year to get ready for the end of the year when, you know, some seats expire and the council has to fill those seats with new candidates. So in that context, one of the conversations last year was about the public safety representative seat. And there's a really simple description in the bylaws about what that seat, who can fill that seat. And it's just somebody who has substantial experience in the public safety field in Contra Costa County. Pretty simple language. But I think what ends up in practice over the years is that seat is generally filled by somebody who works in law enforcement. And so I think the conversation was, and folks in H3, feel free to jump in if I'm missing any context, was that it would be helpful to expand that definition and ensure that not just folks from law enforcement, but considering kind of the umbrella of the seat name, public safety, so include people like emergency medical services, fire, potentially crisis response, disaster response, that all of these types of entities have unique and important perspectives to lend on, you know, the topic of homelessness and helping to, you know, make the system better from those perspectives. So did I miss anything there on context, Jamie or Jamie?
No, I think you nailed it. It's not to necessarily preclude any applicants from law enforcement to apply, but to make sure everybody is aware public safety has that broad definition.
So the question is for folks is, I mean, do you have any thoughts, any concerns about this? And we don't have the specific language here yet. We haven't gotten to that point, but just, I mean, this is the gist. Probably going to include, you know, these specific entities in the language so that people know specifically what other groups are, you know, within the confines of this particular seat. And then so this one is, what do you think about that? Do you like it, not like it? Do you have concerns? And then the other question is, I mean, should we change the seat name? Does public safety representative not really reflect what we just described? Is there a different name that's better? So those are the two questions on the table. Any thoughts?
Leslie has her hand up.
I love broadening it for two reasons. One, the issues that need to be looked at around people living unsheltered and unhoused touch all of those. High users of emergency medical services, the first at danger in a crisis or a fire or a flood or a disaster. So it makes sense to have those voices at the table. And then also with a broader group of people who could apply for that seat, chances are we might have a broader group of representation with lived experience of all different kinds. So it would broaden, not to make a huge generalization, but the pathway to law enforcement is perhaps a little narrower than the pathway to some of these other career areas. So I love this, and I think the name public safety representative is okay, but it doesn't excite me, but it doesn't create a problem for me either.
I agree. Yeah.
I really.
Thanks, Leslie.
I'm a big fan of widening it. And I wonder if, like, there's a particular reason we would want to ensure we do continue to have law enforcement involved in this committee. Better to know.
Didn't there used to be two seats?
There used to be
And then
two
we-
seats, and it was
Yeah.
called law enforcement, I think.
And we repurposed
And we-
both the seats.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we repurposed one of the seats for a second lived experience advisor seat, and then tried to broaden. So I see a couple of.
So would it be out of the question to still have the law enforcement seat as well as add this? I mean, like, could we
Here's-
have both?
So that opens up like a whole another thing about adding more seats to the council, which is like, we are already kind of at the edges of how big you would want a group, this kind of a group to be. That's something the governance committee could do. But I'll just add, like, for this seat, it's not excluding, it's not excluding law enforcement, it just broadens it. So,
And then for the name, I could see going to community safety representative.
That would work, and it kind of removes the extra meaning of like, you know, the police officer.
Public health.
Yeah.
Noting the community safety name. Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to also echo the kind of suggestion of having, I know it would be a lot to do with whole second seat, but I do like the idea of having a law enforcement specific seat and also having this. So I know I can have my cake and eat it too, but it does make me think like we are broadening our scope, and we will get more diverse experiences and opinions. And also law enforcement is very particular, and having that connection could be, I think, is beneficial. And I would be worried that like we would lose that connection, and we would gain something else great and very and amazing. But yeah, because of that particularity of law enforcement, the way they affect people experiencing homelessness, and kind of, I think that will be important.
I agree too.
one thing I wanted to add that's come up in other conversations around this too is the question came up sort of in this first responder language of like, well, what about behavioral health crisis response? And so there was some conversation about like, we do have a behavioral health seat. And so in the way that we describe this, and I just mentioned this as a staff person, who's usually the person that's out like recruiting and answering people's questions about like, do I or do I not qualify for this seat or that seat? Just to note, like when the conversation happens about how we describe it, either in the name or the description, to be really clear about if like behavioral health crisis response / first responders are included in that, or if it's really meant for these other like EMS, fire, police, disaster.
And I'll just add, a lot of the conversation that I'm hearing is probably something that would happen by the nominating panel as well. Say they get 5 applications, they would be discussing, well, what is the value of the perspective of this particular person in the role that they have in public safety or community safety bring, and what will be the best asset to the council. So it's not to say that just because we'll have more applicants doesn't mean we'll go in a different direction, because that's the job of the panel, to kind of assess council structure and the responses we get in applications and make sure our voices have the representation needed.
And actually with that additional clarification, I'm good.
That was helpful.
Awesome. Okay. If there's no other comments or questions, this has been a great discussion. I will take your feedback to the nominating committee. I don't think I threw a slide on with the dates, but what I'll do is just drop them in the chat. So these are the dates for the governance committee. Again, folks are welcome to attend there. If this is a topic you're interested in providing more feedback on, or just curious about the other topics that they're going to discuss, so you're welcome to join in that as well. That's later this month. But thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Yay. Riley. I'm happy that this kind of stuff is coming to this group now. Joe, there is a registration link for governance. We will get that to you in a minute. Sorry, I'm just moving through all of these. So we have about half an hour left. There's just a few things more that I want to get through. So one is, some of you know this and some of you don't. So every quarter, and I'm actually getting ready to do it for the next one, the Council on Homelessness sends a report to the Board of Supervisors, basically saying, this is what we worked on last quarter, and we have it formatted in a particular way. Thanks, Mark. And so we do have like an equity section, and it's kind of under, and I'll might have included a past one in the report. But my question is, traditionally we've been reporting equity, like really just like this is what the equity committee is working on. And I think as we're getting our feet under us, trying to think about equity more holistically, in our system. So wanting to check in with this committee about how, if you have thoughts about how you want us to be reporting out about the equity work in our system of care. So some different options, you know, we would basically have like an equity header, but we could talk about equity related things in all our different committees, equity related things under different funding opportunities. We always share the demographics of the meeting attendance. So we do those like little polls at the beginning of the council meeting. So we always share that. Also anything relating to collaborations or training. So just wanted to do a temp check with you all around the equity report, the equity section of the reports to the council, to the Board of Supervisors. Do you have any strong feelings?
When I first came in, I really liked the polls. I like, ooh, I want to take this back to the college. That's what I thought. Now I've done the poll a couple times and I'm bored. My one thought about it would be changing up one of the questions each time, and adding other equity questions. So class, income, I know, sensitive, uncomfortable. We have to get uncomfortable.
Educational level.
Education
maybe.
level is a big one.
Self-identification of some sort of disability. Or
Yeah,
disabling
disability was the
condition,
one I was
you
thinking
know?
about.
Yeah.
How did you get there?
Great.
I've always wondered about those, and I know I could probably go back and answer it myself from the raw data, but what have been the shifts from the very beginning when we started doing that to where we are now? Has there been some shifts? I've always been curious about that, but
Of like the demographics.
yeah, like
That's a really good
is
question.
it more diverse? Is it more broad? Is it all of those things we've been hoping for? That's just a point of reference. So I've always been curious about that. But what I really would like to say on this topic is, those all sound like very reasonable things to report. If I'm a policymaker though, I'm probably really gonna wanna see at the end of the day, that report with the 29,000 recommendations. Is there any progress on any of them? At the end of the day, that's what I think we also need to be asking ourselves, you know? So where's that part of the equation? But
Yeah.
I don't have strong feelings about any of this.
That's a good point. And actually, so when we get, in our 2024 work plan for the equity committee, we have sort of 3 chunks. And so part of I was thinking is like, we could report out our progress just on the equity committee. Well, actually, it could be even more broadly for the council or the system of care of sort of those, I'm not gonna make you jump, but it's sort of like collaborations, projects, and the ways that equity is being threaded in across all of the committees and the work groups. So do you know what you missed? I was just saying, thinking about how we're reporting out about equity on our quarterly reports to the board of supervisors, like, are there specific things that you all would want to see us tracking, capturing, putting in those reports?
Or congratulating ourselves on, but please go, say what you're gonna say and then I'll follow up on that.
It was just a quick clarification if this is kind of all of the things we're currently discussing that might be possible.
Yeah, so
And then
like,
additionally, like what would add as well.
yeah, and right now, like the way it's been working is we have these sort of like system initiatives. And so we have a header for equity, and under that, it's really focused mostly on like, this is what the equity committee narrowly is doing. But obviously there is equity work, related work happening throughout our system of care. So just trying to think about a way to like structure that or incorporate those other pieces.
Success stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's quantitative data. I think that's something that as policy advocacy, they want to see the outcome.
Yeah, in the reports, we don't do success stories in those reports. We do them in our quarterly newsletter, our monthly newsletter, which they may or may not read, but I like the idea of including a success story. Joe, I see your hand up.
Yeah, is there a way, I'm going to say to work backwards on this question. Is there a way that in the report, throughout the report, instead of saying this is what equity is doing, we kind of highlight throughout the report, here's an equity, like a highlight, like here's equity 1 and throughout what we're doing, here's equity 2 throughout what we're doing, instead of, because
Yep, I thought about that too.
Because the way that I'm thinking about this is more in like a spider web or like maybe even an octopus kind of like, I mean, you've got the hub of equity, but it's touching upon everything that we're doing.
No, I agree. It keeps it from being siloed. Like I've thought about that.
Right.
So let me just share with you, like, so here's all of our reports that we do every year or every quarter. So we could, like we have like system funding and we talk about these things. Like we could decide to put like an equity
Within
blurb
system funding.
within
we
each
did
of
this
these
for
things,
equity.
like what's relating to equity for each of these kind of, and we can
and being specific and being very specific, like in that this is what we're doing within equity and that subject title.
So
Yeah.
I really like that, especially because I think having the other committees coming to us for input and then us being able to provide that input within those different sections, I think that works really well.
Okay. So related to these reports,
Did you know?
oh, sorry, Juno, go ahead.
I was gonna ask a related question about I love all this too, and then my next thought is who are we going to ask for those like reports or for those stories or yeah, I guess probably council members, I would imagine.
Well, so it's a because so right now the way the reports are generated is I write them as staff. And basically I'm usually checking in with like our H3 staff. Like we have somebody who's tracking Path Innovations Committee and somebody who's tracking blah, blah, blah. And I'm kind of like getting that information just from staff. But I think like, if we're talking about success stories, the way that I'm usually getting those success stories for our newsletters is to really reach out to providers. So are you thinking about success stories or like the,
Both like success stories and also like the equity elements we want to highlight.
yeah.
Because like, that could be something we want to ask the council, what
Mhm.
should we highlight
Mhm.
for this quarter?
From your
Or-
different committees.
Or it could be
Mhm.
like, we just keep, it could be the equity committee determines what it's highlights, or
So I think we can incorporate that, like, you know, every quarter I come and I say, hey, we need to do recommendations. In our, and so it could be part of the, like, not just what are the recommendations, but what are the equity pieces that you all want to highlight? At the council meetings, like we can solicit that from council members too.
I think that might be helpful. Not that I think we could, not that I think like the equity committee, or hopefully not you by yourself, could like task our brains with like figuring out.
Yeah.
Where is the equity in these things we've been doing, but like, if we have things to show off, like from the
Yeah.
council and from those organizations, we really should.
Yeah, absolutely. So related to that, actually, so the other piece I want this group to start thinking about is when we do those reports, we always have a like, what are our recommendations as a council for the Board of Supervisors? Like, what would we like to see them think about, do, whatever? Obviously, there's some like limitations on that, but I would love us to start coming forward with some that are equity specific also. And sort of in that same pie in the sky, like I'm happy to take any recommendations and then we as staff can figure out like, sorry, that's like out of the lane of what the council can actually ask the board for. But like, now is a great time to, if you have thoughts.
I
Yeah, go-
have one, but before we could take it to the Board of Supervisors, it's actually something I think we'd have to take to our committee and start doing. Which would be math.
Masking.
Math.
Uh-huh.
40% of our homeless population is disabled. That's from the point in time count. I don't have the exact number, but something like that. And to truly make our meeting accessible for all, I think it would be something to reconsider, you know, highly encouraging our council members to be wearing masks, and to have them available for folks who are coming in.
Yep.
So that is one high level kind of thought I had, that I was a contact tracer, and so I know that like in the public health world, COVID has shifted so much and it's hard. But I think especially because a lot of us are direct service providers and are working with so many people, we get sick, it takes us out, it takes us back, it sets us back. And I think I'm mostly just trying not to get sick these days.
Yeah, yeah. Yep. So that could be something like we, you know, recommend the Board of Supervisors to encourage masking.
Well, we already encourage masking.
Yeah.
Well, we haven't encouraged us directly.
Mhm.
Like, we have understandably gotten like a bit more on our like on our beginning meeting kind of stuff. We have like gotten a bit more looser on like, okay, we've seen this a million times, but like we could, you know, it's always encouraged. But yeah, we've even kind of leaned back a bit, like not just you, but like,
No,
it's
yeah.
me, it's me.
Yeah.
It was-
Never calling out, always calling it.
yeah, yeah.
No,
So it was me, like, cause like, yeah, we cut down things on time, you know, have to make some efforts to be like, okay, we said that exact sentence like 15 times. But yeah, I do think we could, at the very least, to go back to encouraging it heavily, because yeah, it's kind of fallen to the wayside, but if not, even something else or something more.
Neat.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it's funny, and I'm grateful for this conversation too, because I sat here going, the two of them are masked, maybe I should mask up, and then I was like, do I see it? And then
Oh, yeah, sorry, like I
Right,
brought them, right? But I didn't
So
put them
so
out.
I mean, I had that conversation in my head, so I apologize that I didn't actually follow through and do that. I do. But maybe we can't necessarily ask the Board of Supervisors to mandate something, but we could talk about it as a norm at the in-person Council on Homelessness meetings, at least as a starting place, right?
Yeah.
That that's a norm we adopt for these reasons at the recommendation of those of us who are thinking about equity and what that really truly means on a germ level. Right? So And I can promise you, I will be wearing a mask whenever we are meeting. So
Mhm.
thank you for the reminder. But maybe it's a conversation we could put on the agenda at the council meeting.
I like that approach a lot because like, there's nothing, there was kind of a shift when it became, we don't have to wear masks
Yep.
anymore. And I think that like, yeah, I think that it would be great, especially coming from the equity.
I was gonna say that could be like an official report out and
Do it
stuff.
right
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm making a note. Yep.
Thank you both.
Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, exactly.
This is Joe. I'm gonna jump in real quick. So we are not saying, however, that if somebody doesn't wear a mask, they can't be at the meeting.
No,
Great. Let's just be clear on that because, okay, that's all.
yeah, and to your point, Joe, like, I think this is so interesting to think about accommodations and norm setting, and then having accommodations. So for some people, like the masks really cause anxiety or trouble breathing, and so like, I think it's, I mean, I think it would be a really interesting conversation to have, just around like the norm setting for the council, and leaving room for accommodations for people where that's not going to work for them.
Yeah. I can definitely imagine it being like, it would be a bit harder, for example, when we're handing out the awards, when we were doing that a few months back.
Yeah.
Like it would be very difficult might feel a certain way about like walking into the room and being required to wear masks. So like making it clear that it's like from an equity viewpoint, this is why we think we should continue to have weight encourage it.
Yeah.
I think is at least at the very least a way to approach it.
Jamie put in a good statistic about 70% of households across the COC have reported having a disabled. So we've got data on our side.
Yeah. Okay, anything else on this, like potential recommendations for go in the report?
Not yet.
Okay. So what I have, I'm not actually gonna make us go through this because it does, what I hear is that we want to do a committee report out at the next council meeting, and we'll talk about this masking piece as a report out topic.
Yeah, I think that's probably. Do you think that's probably a good time to? I'm wondering how we approach it. Like, do we think that like we just have it as part of the report out? Is it like, do we just highlight? Do we go back? Do we highlight at the beginning of a meeting? Maybe yes, Wayne to
I think
talk
it
about.
would be a good discussion during equity.
Yeah, I mean, we could even take this, even if it's just 5 minutes to say like, so this, we had our meeting and this is when we were talking about recommendations for the board. One of the things that came up is this conversation for us as our own entity. And so at the end, actually, I'm going to get to like who might want to do like if we do a presentation, which probably we want to, who might want to lead that conversation.
And my other question was the other things we've already been discussing, like potential of adding in the kind of equity element into the report out for the board of supervisors. Are we also going to bring those to council?
We could.
I think that maybe all these ideas need to be like this board developed, but like I that idea in particular, probably other ones that I'm forgetting about from the hour and a half. I think there are some that would probably the council would be like here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I think so there's going to be a meeting with me and you actually, and Wayne and Jamie to agendas. Like when we start talking about the agenda for the next meeting, we'll make sure there's a placeholder for equity committee to actually do a report out, and there's a few things we can. Yeah. Okay, I want to just do a really quick note on, so in terms of monitoring, there's a few things that I wanted to just bring back to this group. So in terms of training, just a reminder, so for council on homelessness members, there's an implicit bias training that everyone needs to do. To date, 2 of our 18 members have completed, although that number might have improved since I sent a reminder. So just noting that. But the other piece I wanted to flag is we do monthly trainings for all of our homeless service providers in the county. And last year we came up with a couple of ideas about how to build equity into the trainings better. So the first one was in the intro slides that we do at the beginning of every training that we do, we've now added this slide, which is essentially just cueing people, no matter what the topic is, to start really thinking about equity. And these are the ways that we came up to like sort of cue that thinking. We've also started asking the trainers whenever they have data to provide data about inequities on their topic. So like, for example, yesterday we had a training, yesterday, we had a training about school system, about working with children, families with children. So the district it was Office of Ed was doing the presentation, they don't actually have their data broken out by race and ethnicity. Like they weren't able to grab that in time. Next year, I want to make sure we have that, right? So that it's not just like, this is overall who's experiencing this, but really looking to see, and I'm sure there are some very deep inequities, especially around race and ethnicity, of like, which families with children are most experiencing it. This is like for the one that we did for working with reentrants, we got this data, right? So it's just giving an example of like really looking at how inequities hit on these particular topics. We also have added a question at the end. So we always do a survey of all the participants of the training to just say like, basically, did this help you? So we've added a question specifically relating to equity. And actually we've added a case study that I'm going to talk about too. We're asking around that, but the equity question is specifically like if the training helped them see or consider equity issues relating to the topic. And so for this last one, for example, you can see 50, most people agreed that it did help them. So we can track that if you want. Like I can bring this data back to you if you want to see like, how things are going with this training. And then the last thing is that part of this is just making the trainings more engaging, but we're asking trainers, no matter what the topic is, to come up with a case study so that people can walk through and really real life examples. But then we're saying, give us your case study ahead of time, and then we as staff are engaging with direct service providers and also either asking them to engage a client or two, or we're finding a client or two that sort of relates to that topic and having them really look at it to make sure that it's capturing the issues that are most relevant to them and ideally has some equity related cues or questions like embedded. So I put an example in the packet. But just wanted you all to know, like, that's what's happening around the COC trainings. And so we're doing this for the-
Hey, Jamie,
Yeah, go ahead.
just really quick, going back one slide, with the case studies part, where does that live in the grand scheme of things? Like, what case studies are you talking about? What are you talking about there?
Yeah, so say there's a so for example, yesterday we had a training about for homeless. This is everything I'm talking about right now is related to the COC trainings that we do
the trainers themselves, those who were, okay, all right. No, I was thinking, okay.
Is that track now?
Yep.
I know I'm moving fast. Yeah, Leslie. And then Juno, or the other one.
I was just gonna ask if the providers and the persons with lived experience are being compensated for their time in reviewing.
That's a great question. We haven't gotten that organized yet. So no, it's been a little bit, we just started this in January, but that's a really good point.
I would think that would be appropriate.
Yep. That's a really good point.
Do the trainers get compensated?
It depends on the training. So some of them are paid trainings and some of them are like internal in our system. Yeah, so it depends. But that's a really good idea for this video. Yes.
My question was going to be, so just to clarify, this is kind of a format thing we're going to apply to all COC trainings. And also simultaneously, we usually have we had last year that I think, if I remember correctly, had an equity training that was the COC.
Yep, exactly. We're going to do that again.
And I imagine Okay, so I imagine in that, yeah, okay, I just wanted to make sure it was,
Mhm.
just that wasn't like taking the place.
No, great question. So we also do have a specific training about equity 101 for all of the homeless service providers. So that's a great point. No, this is not to replace that. We're just trying to seed equity in all the things that we do. So like, for example, these are all the trainings that are coming up for the next couple months. We are making sure that for each of these trainings, we are asking those questions at the beginning. We're asking for case studies from the trainers and vetting them ahead of time. We're going to ask the equity related questions in the surveys. All that stuff I described is going to happen with each one.
I love that.
Yeah,
I do
That
too.
sounds great.
Great. Okay, I know we are like almost out of time. Mostly what I want to do is give you guys a very quick update on materials development. So this is like our big project from last year. The thing I would like to check in with you all is there are sort of three big projects right now. One is creating a video, and we have like a filmmaker that we're going to work on, blah, blah, blah. We have done a lot of work on a flyer, and I'm working on frequently asked questions. Basically for people that have questions about like how our whole system works. My question is, are there people interested in working on any of these projects with me? And I will reach out to you separately. So there's videos, and this is who was like involved last year. So checking to see if there are people for the video, sort of, there's a couple pieces to think through, help with maybe looking at the script, help thinking about engaging partners for that. So I see Juno. Juno, are you still interested in that?
I'm still interested in the video.
Okay,
I think my capacity might be a little bit lower than it was last year,
Yep.
so I might have to pull myself off FAQ.
great, that's fine.
And throw me on FAQs. I think I might have a good,
Great,
good flow.
awesome. And I also throw this out to anybody else that's attending this meeting. You are welcome. You can actually just drop your name in the chat if you like. The thing I want to check in with this group real quickly. So it sounds like we're going to do a report out to the council. Is there anybody of the committee members that's interested in actually doing that presentation? And I will support you. We will help you. I will like make the slides. We'll work on it together. We just need somebody besides me from the committee who would report out to the council in March.
I volunteer.
Okay,
And if anybody else wants to do it with me,
great.
I would appreciate support our team.
I can be part of the team too,
Okay, so related to
assuming
that.
my life doesn't go completely upside
Yes,
down. But yeah.
exactly. So the other piece is our March agenda will be more of a working group, but I want to kind of keep that same format of learn, input, monitor. Probably less on the input, but would love a thought partner for building that agenda too. Is there anybody that's interested in helping me think through the agenda for March? It's probably at most like a 1 hour conversation.
I'd be
Okay,
happy to help on that too.
opening on, you guys are gonna be
yeah.
my thought partners. Okay, great.
Hey, Jamie.
Yes.
I was in the chat a little while ago, but
Oh, yes.
count me in for the frequently asked questions and brainstorming, and
Awesome.
keep me apprised for all of that.
Great. Awesome. Okay, so we had built in time for open discussion, but I'm done eating, sorry.
That's okay.
But we can also do that in the next, we can build more time in that for the next meeting. I know there was a lot of like business to get through.
There's also a lot of really great
I think-
discussion
yeah,
within
I
it,
agree.
so I think it worked really well. I think that if we didn't have active discussion, I would definitely want it at the end.
Yep.
So I think either or worked, but I was really quite happy with this meeting.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And if there are things, we didn't really have a lot of time, but if there are things that you for sure want to like learn about, know about, shoot me emails and I can help sort of put that in the like hopper of things that we can put on the agenda.
I think I love that. I like the new format for
Mhm.
how these meetings are structured. And I think that having that structure will be really, really beneficial because we were just kind of trying to figure it out before
Yep.
what would work best for equity. And it's nice to be happy. Okay, we're trying this year, so.
Well, and I'm really happy about the, like, you gave input for governance and for funding. Like, I think that was a super important conversation. And I'll say, even though you're not on those committees, like, you're welcome to jump into those conversations, when they start to discuss those things and provide their.
I know I'd probably be a good person to give some feedback.
Yeah.
I think I'm like the one who applied who like withdrew the name.
Well, I mean, the thing about NOVO, and this is the thing that we're sort of, it's like, I always call it like the PhD level funding application.
Yeah,
Like,
you
it
told
is,
me that when I texted you and freaked out.
it's really
Not the one you want to start.
No, it's definitely not what you want to start with. So, but that doesn't mean there aren't ways, and this is something actually this committee can start thinking about too, which came up in another meeting. Like, also, are there ways that we as a system can create equity or build on-ramps for smaller BIPOC-led nonprofits or projects that want to start to get in? So that this is like, also think about that.
Yeah, it's kind of in the background of all that
Mhm.
stuff.
Yep.
Mhm.
There's a lot of policy on that front already in the affordable housing funding space, on the capital side, that I think
Interesting.
would be great to make, not recreate the wheel and reuse for the service side.
Absolutely. And I'm looking to see, Iman, are you on the funding? So that, I mean, it would be great. I know you're like a super busy guy, but to have you in on those funding committee conversations, because that's where those discussions are really happening about like the applications and the rubrics and the like, how are we even setting up our process? So
Yeah, that would be great. Yep.
our work here for today is done. I appreciate you all. First equity committee of the year.
Great.
Boom, done. Well done. That's it. Thank you for those of you that came in online. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody.
Leslie, I like what you had to say about the outcomes too. I think especially thinking